Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARS. And I'm here to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Sustainable Safety versus Vision Zero. This is a joint webinar with ITE Canada, and it's garnered a lot of interest. We actually have over 170 people registered to watch today's webinar. So that's very exciting. I'm joined today by two speakers from MobiCon, and I will present them in a minute. First of all, some announcements and housekeeping items. In terms of announcements, I want to announce that the CARS ICTCT conference, which is also in collaboration with Parachute, is happening this May from the 20th to the 23rd in Quebec City. ICTCT stands for International Cooperation on Theories and Concepts in Traffic Safety, and they're a similar organization as us, but in Europe. So we partnered with them and Parachute to bring this year's conference. The theme of the conference is entitled Innovative Interventions and Technologies for Safer Roads, a Global Perspective. And we do bring that global perspective to light in that we've got a lot of international speakers whom we've invited to come and present to our delegates. We also have over 100 presentations from our road safety community here in Canada, as well as abroad, about their projects, research, policy work, and other activities related to road safety. We've got technical and recreational tours and many activities for students and young professionals, including some financial support for students. And lastly, we've got some networking and celebratory activities. I am also here to tell you that the opening of registration and our program is next Tuesday, March 4th, so keep an eye out for that. If you haven't already, we encourage you to join our mailing list for conference updates, and the link for that will be in the chat. Now, in terms of housekeeping items, we have a feedback survey at the end of this webinar that we ask you to complete. It's to provide us with information on what you liked. Is there anything that you'd like to see different? And also, is there topics that you'd like us to cover in the future? And to give you a little motivation to fill that out, we're actually offering a $25 gift card. We're going to select a lucky winner out of those who complete the survey. The other housekeeping item I want to add is that we do accept questions and entertain those, but not until the end of the webinar. And we ask you to use the Q&A function to submit those questions, and you can submit them anytime through the webinar. Now for the introduction of today's speakers. Anna Luton, she is our workshop facilitator. She works with MobiCon. She's a communications specialist based in North America, originally hailing from the Netherlands. Anna was the first bicycle mayor of Amsterdam and is focused on urban cycling safety and advocacy to foster sustainable transportation in North America. Anna brings a diverse experience, which has seen her collaborate in various industries from fashion and e-commerce to bicycle manufacturers, startups, and urban mobility organizations, and is an excellent storyteller with a flair for developing implementable strategies, working adeptly from strategy creation through to execution. With her expertise in mobility, she is passionate about improving urban environments for the betterment of communities and cities. Joining Anna, we also have Narayan Donaldson. He's a transportation planner with MobiCon. He has 7 years of experience and planning and engineering experience in Canada and the Netherlands. He's passionate about rebuilding streets and networks to allow people to move safely and efficiently using all modes of transport. He specializes in the design of intersections, including physical design and traffic safety control, with a particular focus on active transportation modes and public transit. Prior to working at MobiCon, he worked as a traffic signal program developer in the Netherlands and in Ontario. He has also had experience designing streets through his previous work as a transportation planner with the TTC in Toronto. His combination of Dutch and Canadian experience make him well suited for adapting European strategies for a North American context. So welcome, speakers, and take it away.
Well, thank you. That was a good introduction. Thank you for that. That's me. Yeah, here we go. Let me see if the access works now. Yeah. At least I think I did that.
No, I think I did that, but
Let me check if it now works. Okay, wait, I'm not doing anything. You can maybe. Are we good to go?
yeah, let's just start. I'll try to get your access reconnected, but in the
Okay.
meantime, I'll move the slides.
If we move back to one slide, then we can start. Okay, well, thanks for having us, first of all. It's good to be here. I will just quickly share a little bit more about Mobicon. Mobicon is a boutique consultancy firm, originally from the Netherlands. We started there 40 years ago, and not 40 years ago exactly, but almost 40 years ago. And this year actually marks our 10-year anniversary in North America, which is quite exciting for us, of course. We do lots of things, but our main mission is making the world less dependent on cars. And we do that by bringing new solutions to integrated mobility and keep innovating everywhere. And we do this from, our services range from multimodal planning, design, but also we do lots of workshops, capacity training, and facility here and there. We have actually a new location. Narayan is there with us today from Ottawa, and I'm actually working from New York City. And we just opened a new location for our office in Portland, Oregon this year. And our newest place where we're working from is actually someone working from New Zealand in the Pacific, which is pretty exciting. So we have this global team, purpose-driven people working around the world, making the world less dependent on cars. Okay, do I have now? I think I can control. Let me check. It's working, yes. So this is me, but Brenda already actually shared a lot about me, more than I could actually even wish to share about myself. But yes, as I shared with you, I'm originally from the Netherlands. That's where I grew up. I'm actually half Finnish too, and moved to Brooklyn, New York, around 8 years ago, where I live with my husband and my 2 kids. They were both born here. I have actually a background, so I did a master's in cultural science and a bachelor in branding and marketing, which is different than most of us in this industry, and probably also most of us joining us for this webinar today. But that experience actually brought me to starting something which is called the Bicycle Mayor Program. And I was appointed the first one in Amsterdam in 2016. And that actually brought me to working in this field, because I'm really fascinated about how to make our streets more livable, and especially living here in New York City, knowing that things can also be different, coming with my Dutch perspective. I'm just trying to see like what needs to happen to make our streets safer, and especially for my kids, of course, because I was 8 years old when I rode my bike for the first time to school by myself, and I'm not sure if I can see my kids doing that, but I'm just trying my best to make that happen eventually. So yeah, I will share, or Narayan, you can maybe share a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, I think just for the sake of time, I'll just say, yeah, hi everyone, thanks for coming. And yeah, I'm a transportation planner. I'm originally from Ontario, but I did study and work in the Netherlands for a few years, and now I'm back trying to apply what I learned in the Netherlands.
Great, thank you. Yes, so to kickstart actually today's webinar, we have this question for you, and you feel free to answer it in the chat or just for yourself, but it's just something that we thought would be fun. So how many Canadian cities, regions, and provinces have adopted Vision Zero? I'm really curious what you think. And let me go to the answer. I don't know if I have control. Yes, I have. It's 35. Answer B. I'm not sure if you're surprised about it. I can't see your reaction, so it's difficult. But it's 35, which is actually great. It's good to know that Edmonton was the first one implementing Vision Zero in 2015. That's 1 year after actually the first US city implemented it. That was New York, where I am now. They started in 2014. So that's pretty great. I have to see how this, I think maybe, oh yeah, okay. Well, this question is pretty relevant for today's topic, sustainable safety versus Vision Zero. What we will do today is we just started with introductions. I will actually share a brief overview of sustainable safety. Then Ryan will go into Dutch design examples. I will continue with an overview on Vision Zero. Of course, I need to touch the safe systems approach then as well, but you will know more later. Then Ryan will actually share some case studies. The case studies he will point out are Canmore, Montreal and Toronto, and then we will have a conclusion and make sure that there's enough time for a Q&A session, because I'm sure many of you have questions. Yeah. These are maybe some questions you will have, but probably more questions arise on the go. If we can't answer all the questions today, feel free to reach out, as Brenda shared already. Feel free to reach out after. We will share also our emails, but you also have Brenda's emails. So you can always, we are happy to help wherever we can. But yeah, sustainable safety and Vision Zero, are these two fundamentally different approaches, or are they just variations of the same idea? And what are the strengths and limitations of each, if there are any? That's our 2 questions of like 4 questions I wrote out there. And I'm really curious, like, to hear your perspective now, but also after this presentation on what you think. Yeah, sustainable safety. So that's an original Dutch approach, which says all traffic fatalities are unethical and preventable. And if you go look at these images here, many of you, I think, are familiar with the history of the Netherlands. It's important to share it now if some of you are not, because yeah, it's also the basis of the sustainable safety approach. But here in this image, you can actually see how the Netherlands has become full circle. So it started first with being bike oriented, then car dominated, and then bike oriented again. And at the end of the 19th century, actually the bikes were dominating our streets. But then just right after the Second World War, between 1945 and 1970, cars were more and more dominating, and you would see more cars coming into the roads, and the roads were actually especially built for the cars. And at the same time, not at the same time, so the roads were actually expanding, more houses were being built, and that was something that was happening around the world. But now the picture most right, that's what you see now. So something changed that made the Dutch become a bicycle-friendly country again. Here you can see actually a graph that shows like the car ownership, which is interesting to see. And that was happening everywhere around the world. But what was actually a turning point for us? And I think many of you have heard of the Stop the Kindermoord in Dutch, Stop the Children Moord. This was a time in the 70s. People were outraged because more and more cars were there on the streets, of course. So, well, kids were actually playing on the streets, and there were just too many fatalities, and people were so done with it. This was a bottom-up approach. People went out to the streets and they started protesting, and the message was clear. They just want to take back their streets, and they had to work with the government to actually make this change happen. Next slide, yeah. this was so you had to stop the Kindermoord at one point, and then at the same time, there was in the 70s there was an oil crisis, which was a big pivot point as well. And so to save money, the government came up with something such as car-free Sundays, which really, in my opinion, sounds amazing, and I would love them to bring it back sooner than later. But car-free Sundays meant that the people were not allowed to drive their cars. And what actually happened is that people went to the streets and they took over. They were playing there. They were just walking, cycling, meeting, sort of similar what you would see now, or what you would have seen during COVID in many places, actually, that streets were locked down during the COVID, or streets were closed during the COVID lockdown, that actually people would meet each other again on the streets. And this make clear for people where our streets were, what our streets were meant to be. They were meant to be places where people would actually meet. So here, with this in mind, both the oil crisis and the Kindermoord, it's important to understand that policies came in waves in the Netherlands, and each wave was building on the last one, actually. Before we got to sustainable safety, there were key steps along the way, starting with the early traffic legislation in the 50s, highway safety in the 60s, urban traffic calming in the 70s, and then improved behavior focused policies in the 80s. And those waves were actually coming before sustainable safety was actually being created. Here, this also is a graph where you can see the fatalities with a turning point in the 70s, which is really interesting because it's not that people were having that there were less cars. The number of cars was still increasing, but the number of fatalities actually went down. And that's where sustainable safety was actually created, because they were uncertain if the number of cars were increasing, the number of injuries were actually going down. So they needed to come up with something, and they came up with the vision of sustainable safety. That was that started in 1992 and was implemented in 1997. And the focus shifted to categorizing streets based on their function and designing them in such way that they would encourage safe behavior. It was also a shared initiative from national, provincial, and municipal governments. And the aim was to reduce the chance of mistakes and reduce the severity of crashes that can't be avoided. So now you will know what was on the foundation. It's good to understand sustainable safety has three core principles, as we would say it in the Netherlands. So first you have functionality, which means that roads are ranked based on their function. So for example, in residential areas, traffic is secondary and the people needs are first, of course. So in those areas, you will probably see more 30 km/h zones. Then there's a second principle of homogeneity. And that means when there are different modes of transport that don't share the same speed, mass, or direction, they should be separated. And especially in the 50 km/h areas. If they are, for example, in the more residential areas, they can actually be combined. And then there is a third principle of recognizability, which means roads should be designed in a way that will instantly tell users what behavior is expected in that certain road. The right road design means drivers instinctively know the right speed, priority, and how to navigate, allowing them to focus more on their surroundings. So those were the three core principles, but then in 2005, there were actually two principles added, one of forgiveness and one of state awareness. And those are actually important because if someone makes a mistake, the road design should minimize the consequences, reducing the risk of serious crashes. And the roads should also help people always stay alert and aware of their surroundings, ensuring that they make safe decisions. So it should be, on one side, you need like people to be aware when they're riding. So for example, if you have a street, cyclist street, what you will see in the Netherlands more, without certain signs, it requires the driver to be alert of their surroundings, and it will take out all other distractions. But at another point, also the design needs to be built that it actually forgives. That it's there, like if human error happens, the design will actually step in, that there wouldn't be a severe crash or something. So these are the core principles. There's actually a new thing we added, and that's the one of research and innovation. And that's, I think, also part of like how the Netherlands came where they are right now. And that's because we always keep innovating and doing research. It's not that this is like, this is the foundation, but this should not be the end. There's always needs to be room for tests and error, and just try to innovate. Yeah, so that's an important one to actually mention, and that's for whatever everyone is doing. Narayan will actually share now a few examples where you can see how these principles come alive on the streets and roads.
Yeah, so you'll probably recognize at the beginning of the sustainable safety the principles, the principle of reducing, avoiding, and not accepting injuries and fatalities on the roadways. But I think what's interesting to note about sustainable safety specifically is it's very design focused. So it's really focused on starting from rebuilding or reconceptualizing the entire built environment. So starting from land use planning through to transportation planning, and then of course down to the details, all the way to the bottom of detailed intersection designs and that kind of thing. So one of the core foundations of sustainable safety as it's applied is the way that it's integrated with road classification. So road classification is, of course, not new to us in Canada. We do it as well. But I think as part of sustainable safety, there's a lot more focus on integrating land use with the road classification. So and that comes from the first principle of sustainable safety, which is functionality. So the goal is almost always to separate place and flow. So where you have large volumes of motor traffic, you generally want that to not be in the areas where people are living and playing and working. And conversely, where you have areas with high activity, a lot of pedestrians, you don't want motor traffic to be there to fundamentally remove the exposure to risk in the first place. And then next down, you have the homogeneity. So that means that when there are higher volumes of a particular user, that there's separation between people with incompatible speeds and masses. So when you have a lot of motor traffic, you don't want to have you don't want cycling to be in the same lane. So to be specific in sustainable safety, generally, if there is a bicycle route that goes along a major a collector or arterial or expressway, then it needs to be physically separated. And conversely, if there are cars on like a local street, they need to be slowed down such that they are compatible with the cycling and possibly pedestrians if it's a shared street. And recognizability. So this is the psychological factor of it. So there's a huge focus on making sure that it's not enough to tell people what the safe thing is, or the correct thing is. You really need, the design is responsible for making that feel natural, and making people subconsciously choose to do the intended operation. So if putting up a sign telling people to slow down is really not going to be considered a solution, because that doesn't actually cause them psychologically to want to slow down. And just a couple examples here. So this is a generic distributor road. So that's roughly a collector or minor arterial, where you see the physical separation of cycling, which I think we've come to become familiar with from the Netherlands. And when it comes to local streets, which are access streets in the sustainable safety framework, there's a big focus on using psychological cues to slow traffic down. So very narrow streets, you have, and again, deliberately narrows. In many cases, even brand new developments might have a 5 meter curb to curb width. And yeah, so different brick pavings, raised intersections, various traffic calming measures that I think we're quite familiar with nowadays. And again, for the arterial roads, and this also applies for rural areas where you have recognizability. So you can look at this kind of road and see, yeah, this is a fairly, it's a road with a fair amount of through traffic. And then that means that there's going to be separate infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists, which is what you see on the right, which is a path, a multi-use path effectively. And just skipping ahead for time, there's a clear distinction between road classification types. So one of the interesting things is that there generally aren't 40-kilometer-an-hour roads in the Netherlands, because as part of homogeneity, they want and recognizability, they want people to be able to look at a street and see immediately what type of street it is. So it's very obvious that when you're going straight, for example, on this intersection, you're on some kind of through street, so a collector or an arterial, and so by law, that means the speed limit's going to be 50 unless otherwise posted. And then if you see the street that's intersecting, it's brick. It's really not geometrically designed for vehicles. You can drive on it. In fact, even there's a speed limit 30 sign on the right, which, so it's not just a plaza. You can drive there, but it's clear that that's not a through street. So you're even if there weren't the 30-kilometer-an-hour sign, you would know that the speed limit is definitely not going to be more than 30 there. And then here's another example at an intersection where you have the similar distinction where you can fairly easily look at these two streets and see, okay, well, yeah, the through road is definitely going to be 50 because that's the default speed limit for a through road. And the one on the left is clearly a lower classification. That's clearly a local, so that's going to be 30, just as part of the consistency of application of the road types. And where two 30-kilometer-an-hour streets intersect, so these are two local streets, there's actually typically no traffic control whatsoever. So this is not even a yield sign. And this is based on the principle of making speeds low enough that people can just use their eyes and interact with each other, or if they are not able to use their eyes, that the other road users are going slow enough that they can let the pedestrians cross the street, for example. Yeah.
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 Okay, if we might have a little bit of time left at the end, maybe we can go through a little bit more of those examples, but I hope this was actually clear how the principles work in practice. That was actually really insightful. Now it's time, now you know a little bit more about sustainable safety, it's actually time to go towards Vision Zero, which you probably all are much more familiar with the core principle, no loss of life is acceptable. Is this now working? No. Yes. So there's Vision Zero. It's originally actually adapted by Swedish Parliament in 1997. And it's more than actually a policy, it's a bold philosophy. And this is for me, of course, interesting with my marketing branding background, because in many ways it's about branding and movement building as it is about traffic safety. It is a vision that is adopted at the highest levels, making road safety a shared responsibility. And at its core, it reinforces a key idea. Roads are not just for cars, they are part of a public space, and public space must be accessible to everyone, including children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Over time, traffic engineers has become more integrated with urban planning and design, shifting the focus from just moving cars to creating safe, livable spaces for everyone. And I would say the strength of Vision Zero lies in its simplicity. And it's a powerful idea. No traffic fatalities are acceptable. And unlike traditional thinking that expects that road users to behave always in a perfect way, Vision Zero is built on the understanding that mistakes will happen. And instead of blaming individuals, the focus is on designing a system that minimizes the consequences of those mistakes. And in Sweden, this means, for example, using speed cameras for enforcement, replacing dangerous four-way intersections with roundabouts, and prioritizing vulnerable road users when designing urban spaces. But also the automotive industry plays, of course, an important role, and especially you would see in Europe that they are actually more advanced with that, and we can learn from them. As said, Vision Zero is not just about infrastructure, but it's a comprehensive approach that brings together multiple players, governments, road planners, engineers, vehicle manufacturers, law enforcement, and public health experts. It combines road design, education, enforcement, vehicle safety, and regulation to create safer streets for all, as said. But while the vision is really clear to everyone, achieving can be really challenging because it's such a bold statement, and zero can be really challenging. And with the vision alone, you will actually not get there. You will need something such as the safe systems approach. And this is actually a common approach in the US. When actually adopting Vision Zero, you would see that communities will also start adopting a safe systems approach. And instead of seeing these approaches as competing with, I would not say this is competing with sustainable safety. I would say it's similar, and you could actually use both in your advantage and make something unique for your own community or city. Achieving Vision Zero is only possible through a safe systems approach, because Vision Zero alone is just a philosophy, and you will need something to actually, you will need a safe systems approach to get there. And the principles are, it should be proactive, preventing crashes before they happen, systematic, so it addresses safety at all levels, equitable, ensures all communities benefit from it, and design-led. So it prioritizes infrastructure over behavior. And at its core, it recognizes that people make mistakes, people are vulnerable, and speed is the biggest factor in crash severity. Safety is a shared responsibility between individuals and governments. And to be truly effective, I believe that the safe systems approach must go beyond the roads, and it must also integrate land use and urban planning as well, because the way we design and start designing our cities is actually directly impacts road safety, and then without that connection, even the best strategies will fall short. Yes, is this, I'm going one step too far, but this was, we can actually move on, but this is more to point out the traditional approach, Vision Zero. Traditional approach, what is important there, that it should not be about blaming the victim, but Vision Zero is actually moving further, and that's also what I want to point out here, because Vision Zero is changing the narrative, and to make that vision a reality, it has to connect with lots of road users, and it has to connect with many stakeholders, and that's why communication is really critical, and especially here in North America. And this is actually what's different from Vision Zero versus sustainable safety, that Vision Zero talks about these aspects as well, and changing the word from accident to crash, for example, that's huge. And that's something that's that's something Vision Zero actually did. And it's also really important. It's important that we change the narrative instead of blaming the victim. Because a crash means an accident is like, okay, an accident can happen, but with a crash, it's not, they are preventable, and they should not happen. We should change how we see it. I can actually talk more about communication, also how we communicate. That's actually funny. Sometimes I see road signs here and they say, drive safe, Vision Zero, something like that. And I'm just thinking Vision Zero is something we all know what it is, but the bigger public doesn't know. So when we share news with like the big public, we should also be careful what words we are using and what words are actually being understood. But that's something, if you're interested about it, I want to talk more because I think it's fascinating. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked a little bit about language and street design, but road safety isn't about infrastructure or human behavior. It's also about vehicles themselves, and sizes actually make a huge difference. This is a picture that was actually shared from a colleague of ours who works from the Delft office in the Netherlands. And it went viral because it says enough. These are the car size, and unfortunately in Canada also the cars are, in my opinion, unfortunately the car sizes are getting bigger. But that means that maybe the people inside the car are safer, but the people outside the car are definitely not. So we should also see like what can we do there actually, and how can we work with car manufacturers to make our streets safer as well. I'm going to the next slide. Yeah. So luckily the conversation around safe streets is evolving. It's not only longer about transportation alone. And this is something I've noticed also joining some conferences here lately about Vision Zero. It's not only about safety, but it's about so much more. It's about making our communities more livable. It's about letting people connect, taking back the streets. It's about green streets who are mostly safe streets, designing streets with tree canopies, for example, or stormwater management and public space to support both safety and sustainability. But it's also, there is a holistic approach needed for that. And safe streets should prioritize people first. Partnerships also do matter. So collaboration with public health experts, developers, and climate and land use specialists, for example, to build more inclusive and sustainable streets. And then equity and health. Vision Zero must go beyond reducing crashes. It must intentionally invest in underserved communities, working alongside housing and public health sectors. And then, of course, climate and resilience, but I already touched on a little bit. The bottom line here is when we design safer streets, we design better places for everyone. And the goal isn't just fewer crashes, it's healthier and more connected communities. So here, did we share? No, okay, let's go. I had a map for the US, but let's actually now go to Canada. So this is a map of Canada, of course, and which places have adopted Vision Zero, with Edmonton being the first one, as I already shared in 2015, and other larger cities like Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal have also committed to Vision Zero, but smaller ones like Kenmore are stepping up as well and doing great work. Narayan will share that in his overview in a minute. While many cities have adopted Vision Zero, success depends on strong policies, consistent funding, and the political will to prioritize safety. So some cities have made major progress, while others are still struggling with implementation. But the real challenge here is turning commitment into action. And that's where you need a safe systems approach or sustainable safety, but a certain approach or plan to make it happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, Ryan, you can take over.
Yeah, so I'd like to present 3 examples of different approaches to implementing safe street systems in Canadian cities and towns. So the first example I want to talk about is the town of Canmore, which is a town of about 16,000 people in the Rocky Mountains, near Banff. It's actually pretty close to Banff. It's the nearest town, about 100 kilometers west of Calgary, with cold, snowy winters. Um, and it's historically has had a lot of car dependence. Most of its visitors do arrive by car, and its busiest season is by far in the summer. Their traffic volumes are much higher in the summer than they are in the winter. So what they did is they decided to make a new transportation plan. So in 2014, they created what is their current integrated transportation plan, though it's being updated imminently. And this is actually a year before Vision Zero was first implemented or adopted in Edmonton. So this is not a Vision Zero plan, but actually it was a plan that was co-developed by Mobicon according to the Dutch sustainable safety principles, which is a little bit different than a lot of the other plans in Canada, which are generally more recently have been focused based on the Vision Zero principles, which are similar but not exactly the same. So what that meant is that the systematic methodology of the sustainable safety approach, which is largely based on land use planning, road classification, design, was applied as part of the transportation planning. So from an infrastructure perspective, that meant that the road network was reclassified and reorganized based on the goal of separating traffic movement away from areas where people live. The street design standards were changed to require appropriate speed limits for the road classification, as appropriate separation for vulnerable road users, depending on the speeds and volumes of cars. And also, for the time, fairly aggressive changes to street design standards. So, 3.0 meter wide lanes on locals and collectors, no center line on locals, which is common, but also on collectors, which I think is less common. And again, a big focus on intuitive design so that they are not relying on enforcement to achieve a large proportion of the speed reduction. That's reinforcement's really only reserved for the few outliers, a couple percent of the population. If a large percent of the population is speeding, that's probably an issue with the design, not an issue with enforcement. And also, yeah, redesigning the local streets to make sure that they are local, that they're not being used as collectors, despite what they may officially be classified as. And on the policy side, there's the accompanying measures they took, such as introducing paid visitor parking. Historically, parking had been free. Introducing free transit. Historically, transit had been paid. Introducing blank citywide 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limits on locals and collectors, and 20-kilometer-an-hour speed limits in shared space, so where there's no sidewalk. And then including their zoning to encourage development in the areas where it is most, there's most opportunity to get around without a car. Adding a lot of new equipment for maintaining the cycling infrastructure in winter, as well as the pedestrian infrastructure. And like I mentioned earlier, this enforcement is really focused as the last resort, in the sense of filling out those outlier small percentage of the population who still are not obeying the laws despite the intuitive design. So giving a couple examples in the town center, since this is their main street, historically, it was actually also the main traffic route through the town, but this was identified as a conflict between people and traffic movement. So traffic in the summertime is completely forbidden from using the main street in the town. It's pedestrian only. So the question, of course, is where do the cars go? And so over the past 10 years, there's been already a fairly substantial modal shift. So a lot of the cars simply went to other modes. There's a much larger percentage of travel now by walking, cycling, and transit than there was 10 years earlier. The chart here is from 2013 to 2023 at accordant count going into the town center. But the cars that are still there have been deliberately relocated to other streets further on the edge of the town center where there's less activity, so there's less exposure for pedestrians to motor traffic. And if we look at some of those other streets where traffic was reallocated, there are measures such as removing all-way stops and changing them to different types of design. Here, an all-way stop was changed to a pedestrian crossover, and a median was introduced to create a bit of a chicane to slow down traffic at the pedestrian crossing. That was just a quick build implementation of a precast element that was just placed on the road. But when there are full reconstructions, they're according to the standards, the new street design standards. So this is a major arterial road, so that means that there's a lot of separation between vulnerable road users and motor traffic with fully protected signal phases, separate cycle tracks, fully actuated operations. Again, so that's just trying to keep the traffic signals as intuitive as possible and make sure that they're not telling you that giving a red light when there's clearly no reason for the light to be red. And then here's another example for a collector intersecting with another collector that you can kind of see that there's narrow roadways using tools such as pedestrian crossovers and continuous sidewalks to make the intended behavior fairly clear just from design, even if there are quite minimal signs. Montreal, Quebec is a good example of a Vision Zero plan. So it adopted Vision Zero in 2016. In 2019, it had their first action plan. So in 2022, the plan, another update, actually adopted the Safe Systems methodology, which is really starting to see the convergence between Vision Zero and sustainable safety, because what that also meant is that there's now an increased focus on land use planning as part of their Vision Zero plan, which is really what the Dutch plan started with, and the two are really converging in the middle, building upon each other's ideas. And that also includes the important part, which is often missed in some of the older Vision Zero plans, is that we often look at safety statistics in terms of fatalities per vehicle mile or vehicle kilometer. But the problem is that ignores the number of kilometers. So one of the most effective ways of reducing fatalities is simply to reduce the number of vehicle kilometers. So this is interesting to see that this appeared in the 2022 plan in Montreal, whereas it's not necessarily in a lot of the other plans still. They also have, similar to the Canmore example, they have target speeds for typical types of street designs. So where you set the intended speed, and then the intent for the plan is that the streets themselves will be designed such that people naturally drive at the appropriate speed for the classification of the road. And there's a couple examples here. Montreal has actually this year introduced quite aggressive standards for narrow lanes and sharp corner radii. The results have been quite positive so far. They did set a target of zero fatalities and injuries in 2040, which I just plotted on there with a straight line. And their trend actually is on track with that target so far as over the past 10 years. Toronto has a somewhat similar Vision Zero plan to Montreal. So they adopted their target in 2016, although they didn't set a target date. And in 2017, they started with a Vision Zero action plan, which was a really powerful statement because it included a lot of very comprehensive support from all portions of the government: the mayor, the infrastructure, chair of the infrastructure, from city council, police, transportation, and health. It was a fundamental, a very strong statement from the city council that they are going to set safety as a top priority. And the 2022 update built upon that as far as identifying some of the key areas where collisions are still happening, severe collisions are still happening, and trying to double down on those measures. Like Montreal, they have design standards, including, like Montreal, quite aggressive standards for narrow lanes and sharp corner radii, more or less almost to the same level as Montreal. And they also have removing channelized right turns. I think one of the limitations of the Toronto plan compared to the Montreal plan is that it's less systematic. It jumped a lot of the time straight to measures. This is their dashboard, for example, for the progress tracking for the Vision Zero program. And for example, they're counting the number of traffic signals, the number of traffic signals with leading pedestrian intervals, but the problem is that those are not necessarily correlated to making safer intersections. In some cases, adding traffic signals can make an intersection less safe, and pedestrian head start signals are actually less safe than some of the alternatives, such as fully protected signals. So the challenge is making sure that the higher level systematic principles are really what everything is based around, as opposed to just having a collection of miscellaneous safety measures. And Toronto has had some success, but nowhere near the level of Montreal as far as the number of the reduction in their fatalities and serious injuries.
Yeah, so to quickly, that was probably a lot of information for everyone here, but to quickly just sum up some of the things we discussed. It's important to understand that Vision Zero alone is a philosophy. Vision Zero is the why, the safe systems approach, the how, and sustainable safety is a framework for planning and engineering. It's a Dutch safe systems model. With other words, Vision Zero is the end goal, and the safe systems approach is how you get there. To go to the I'm going one slide further. Sorry. Okay. I'm missing one, sorry. Okay. Moving forward, all these three approaches recognize that human error happens and should not be. You can adopt the core philosophy, but you still need an approach such as the safe systems approach to get there. A safe system requires combination of policy, road design, and speed management, and it's case by case. So there's no simple copy-paste solution or a one-size-fits-all. Every city community has their own unique needs. I want to go to the next slide. So how to move forward? As you've seen in examples, details do matter. Think in terms of network planning and not just projects that can help partner outside the transportation box. And it takes time and focus and commitment. And that's especially what you see in the Netherlands. It's like almost 50 years of work in progress. And then last, there's also no silver bullet, but learn from best practices. Start working with pilots, test, see what happens, and get the community involved as well. This is a quick overview, but I will skip that one. But that was just like sort of putting everything together. You can see it in the end. But I think we have still a little bit of time for some questions if they are there.
Yeah, they are.
Well, thank you both so much. That was an excellent presentation and great overview on the history behind the different approaches and just how they compare and contrast. And it was great having those examples as well to illustrate your points. And we do have some questions. And also, just before I get into those, I do want to share that this recording will be on the FARC website in the area where you're registered for the webinar. So there will be a webinar recording there. And I've had some requests for the actual slides themselves. Is that something I can post to that section as well?
We'll send you the slides.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, so I'll just dig right into the questions. So one of them, this is a very interesting one. She says that we have many cities introducing slow streets or speed limit reductions. What would you say to those who complain about their commutes or journeys are impacted negatively? In other words, taking longer. And just a comment, it's unfortunate that we are always having to respond to these notions of efficiency versus safety. And just what would you say to those kind of comments?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the big advantages of the Dutch approach well, effectively to Vision Zero, right? Is that it recognizes the importance both of movement and of safety. So basically, it doesn't say that we're going to stop movement in order to have safety. What it really says is we are going to have movement, but we're going to keep it away from the areas where people live, and we're going to keep so basically on effectively highways, so various other types of limited access roads. And that's as that progresses, as new areas are developed, it means that those areas they really don't have that much traffic movement in the areas immediately around residential, commercial developments anyway, because the priority for the past now several decades has been to have dedicated infrastructure. So there is a transportation network for cars and trucks that is efficient for them, that is so that it's not that as much of a challenge to reduce speeds on local streets and collectors because by definition, based on road classification, you're only on those streets for the first few hundred meters and last few hundred meters of your trip. The entire rest of your trip is going to be on highways and arterial roads, where so reducing those speeds in the neighborhoods to 30 from 40, it really doesn't make any significant difference to people's trips. So that's the big advantage of the systematic safety approach from the Dutch approach.
Yeah, and it goes back to the priority of the Dutch sustainable safety approach, as you said, was the planning and the infrastructure and focusing on that and road design from the get-go and just trying to
Everything with its
accommodate.
function.
Yeah,
Yeah, function.
exactly. Yeah, perfect. Okay, I have another question here. What are the typical operating speeds on distributor roads in the Netherlands? Are there concerns with using traffic calming measures that may require drivers to travel below the speed limit?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because, as I mentioned, they do have this goal of having very distinct road classifications. So local streets are 30, collectors and arterials are 50. But as you're probably thinking, well, a lot of the time that 50 is pretty fast, like if it's a commercial area. And the answer is yes. So they do often design streets that even though it's posted at 50, like it's really quite tight and it's still quite urban. So in practice, the speeds will be less than 50. So it's not that a street that's designed for 50 is always going to be, you're going to expect people to drive 55. It may be that it's actually designed for 45. And that's really, you can get away with that for urban streets where it is 50. And it's actually designed for that because at those lower speeds, there is a lot more ability for the drivers to simply pick an appropriate speed based on the conditions and not be so much focused on what the posted speed limit is. It's not that people are seeing like, oh, it's 50 is the target. I should be able to reach 50. It's like, no, that's just generally what urban areas are. You could potentially reach 50, but not necessarily.
It's
And I like what you
difficult.
said about making roads recognizable so that as soon as you see it, you know. Sorry, were you
Yeah.
going to say something, Anna?
No, but it's difficult sometimes to speed up because the design is just built in that way that it's like it's almost hard. It yeah, it's sometimes impossible.
Right. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more, and I'm also just going to mention that we are recording all these questions, and we will make sure that they get to Anna and Narayan to follow up. So just a couple more. This is interesting. How do you suggest addressing the cultural differences between the Netherlands and Canada?
Yeah, so this is always a fundamental question, right? What is the culture? And the question is the culture a result of our built environment, or is a built environment the result of our culture? And I think, I mean, of course, the answer is both, right? So the advantage of the Netherlands has been since the 1970s, the streets have been being reconstructed. So they're as other modes of transportation become more practical, people use them, and then they understand what like the challenges are when you're riding around your cycling if they're using it more. Um, as far as like fundamental changes to culture, I as a planner slash engineer, that's I mean, it's basically it's a fixed thing. It's we can affect people's behavior, and maybe that will affect the culture. And I mean, from my perspective, given that we know we can change behavior with our physical designs, that's good enough for me. We know we can make changes to the environment that will improve the quality of life and safety for residents.
But I think it's
Perfect.
also, so for example, I grew up with having that perspective, like my neighborhood where I lived, that was like everywhere is a 30 km/h zone. Just going to school was like just that area, and cars were actually sort of being gassed. So there was always priority for cyclists and pedestrians. And that's my normal. So coming here in the US or in Canada, I just see like, hey, why is this like this and this is like this? It's just, I'm used to something different. But that concerns me as well because my kids grow up here, and for them, this is their normal. The streets that we have here, where I'm in New York, and some parts are great, but some parts I'm like, how is it possible that people can actually speed up like this? So it is important that we do our best to make these changes, because then actually, and especially in certain generations, will think, hey, that's normal. So it will also take time. That's important to know.
And that's a great note to end our webinar on. That's a fabulous thing to think about and to carry forward and to communicate to those we work with and to others who can impact the safety of our roads. So I just once again want to thank the two presenters who did an excellent job. And once again, we will have this posted as well as the slides, and we will follow up regarding the questions as well. And also just one, at the very beginning of the chat, I have posted the link to the webinar. So once again, please fill that out to give us some feedback on today's survey. And if you'd like to see them back, talk about any other projects they're working on, put that in there. I haven't asked them, but we can go back and see if they can come back again, because they're excellent presenters. And just thank everybody for attending today's webinar. And take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.